Welcome, folks, to The Uncommon Good with Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr. Every week, diving deep into the truth of Catholic social teaching and restoring all things in Christ. The Uncommon Good, live from Iowa Catholic Radio's Mercy Live Up Studios.
The Uncommon Good is on the air. I'm Bo Bonner.
This is Bud Ice.
Oh, wow.
Budweiser brew a Bud Ice?
I think we owe them money now. But of course, what you're talking about is just the frosty temperatures. So you threw me off on that one. I wasn't expecting that one. Sorry. So I'm coming to you live from extremely dangerously chilly winter wonderland, Des Moines, Iowa. I'm Bo Bonner, where I'm the Director of Mission and Ministry at Mercy College of Health Sciences and the Director of the Zeta Institute for Foundation, Ethics, and Leadership. You can find us at mchs.edu and zetainstitute.com. Bud, we are currently, if I'm not mistaken, negative 15 with wind chills in the negative 37. What's it like in balmy Pittsburgh?
Yeah, we're not as bad as you guys. I think it's 7 degrees right now with a bad wind chill. Although we did get we got a dusting of snow last night, and so I'm holed up in my house because I couldn't make it to work.
Well,
where I work at the National Institute for Newman Studies.
There you go.
NewmanStudies.org.
Okay, there you go. I knew we'd get there. No, it's I was informed that I think I'm going to get a plaque or a statue here at the radio station, Bud, because not everybody. I mean, of course, the people behind the boards made it because people don't treat them right. Is that right, guys? They were guilted into it, right? So, it's like, it's essential workers, right? So, there's nurses and doctors, and then people working the boards at radio stations. They all made it.
Yeah.
And then me, evidently, right? So I'm pretty essential. No, I'm kidding. Well, I'll say this, as someone who grew up in Oklahoma, and this is the coldest I've ever been. Lame as it sounds, if you're not in the wind, it really is truly not that bad. If you are in the wind, you do feel like the atmosphere of Earth has decided it's mad at you.
This is insane. And I'm reading about the temps in Chicago. It really is like the freeze of a lifetime. And I know, Bo, you've kind of bragged about your Norse heritage.
Right.
Have you drawn a line? Like, this is a bridge too far.
Well, I don't know. I get to stay inside where there's heating, and we go outside with, jackets that I didn't have to, like, skin my own polar bear or anything to get my jacket, so I still don't feel like I can complain too much. I really, my heart goes out to everybody who's working outside today. So if you yourself are working outside, or if you have family members that are, I'm going to be the last person to make claims about how the weather is. But certainly make sure to stay as warm as possible. Make sure to drink that coffee. And then the wisdom that I learned from my first real Iowa winter last year, where our pipes froze but they didn't burst, so we got lucky, is, just always keep that water dripping, folks. That's the way to do it.
Yeah, that's good advice. And I remember when that went down, you guys had to hole up at a hotel. So
yeah.
I'm grateful for you and your wife that you learned that lesson.
Yeah. Well, and get the hair dryers running. If, Bud, like with my children, you have to tell them about 6 or 7 times why we're having the faucets run and why we have the doors under the sinks open. Maybe what I needed to do was print out a big sign that said, "Don't turn off the sink or shut the doors." And I could have done that if I had ink from Cartridge World. Cartridge World, underwriting our show, 801 73rd Street, Windsor Heights. If you need to make predictions about the Super Bowl and write them down, but, those signs that tell your kids what to do in the cold weather, maybe that's what we're all waiting to do.
Well, you and I had a mutual professor friend who had a 10 Commandments for her son that she posted at home. One was like, "Don't shoot a nail gun off of the neighbor's roof." I hope she went to Cartridge World for the 10 Commandments of the household. That's a great place to do it.
So, and then also underwritten, as always, by Mercy College of Health Sciences. But, this is the craziest thing, I actually think. It's one thing to cancel classes. Mercy College is closed today, and basically every major college in the Midwest is closed. And that's like places that never close. So I kind of was thinking that maybe this was more normal, and I just, we've had some mild winters, but when you're closing down, Mercy College, Iowa State, Wisconsin, Notre Dame, that's pretty serious.
Well, yeah, I mean, for Mercy, it's kind of a no-brainer because you all serve so many commuter students who, would have to travel through it. But we have a good friend of the show, Tim O'Malley, who teaches at Notre Dame. And I think he's spent like about a decade and a half of his life at Notre Dame. And he said this is only the fourth time they've closed because of weather.
Yeah, no, actually that's funny because then he talked about living in Tennessee, and he's like, we would close 4 times a winter in Tennessee. Like every time it like barely had a snowflake, they're like,
yeah,
close everything down. And they sounded like that. No offense, Tennessee. But
you could say Southerners are snowflakes about snowflakes.
Yeah, that is absolutely true, and you are now allowed to make that T-shirt and make money off of it.
Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, today it's you and I. The guest is the bitter cold, but we're going to talk about the family unit as the most basic unit of political society. I think we might have brought this up very early on in the show, but there's a lot in the news that makes it where doing that is really important, so we're going to make sure to do that today. But also, folks, we have another great moment in church history coming up, so make sure to stick around for that as well. We're going to stay warm, huddled together here, letting the heat emanating from our machines and boards here at the radio show keep us warm, and we're hoping that you are staying warm too and listening to The Uncommon Good, and we will be back after these brief messages. But I'm really hoping, but I have no necessarily evidence of this, but if as many people stayed at home as we thought, maybe people will be listening and they can text in on the Zip Whip line. 515-223-1150. That's 515-223-1150. Ask us whatever you would like. Hashtag UCG for The Uncommon Good if you want to leave a message for us to answer later. But the Zip Whip line. 515-223-1150. 515-223-1150. Come on, folks. You're bored. Your body temperature is going down. If you feel like you're getting, drowsy, you might just be sleepy. That's also, one of the signs of hypothermia. So get up, get those bones and muscles and blood moving. Text us some questions. We'll make sure that we can answer them for you. And, we look forward to hearing from you. This is The Uncommon Good. We'll be back, like we said, after these messages. Stick around.
Each day, approximately 12 Iowa mothers terminate their pregnancy because they feel they have no other choice. At Intervisions Healthcare, we offer pro-life alternatives like parenting and adoption to women like Linda, Claire, and Olivia who entered the clinic undecided, lacked family support, or suffered financial hardships. After pregnancy counseling, prenatal education, and ultrasounds, nearly 800 vulnerable and at-risk mothers have chosen life for their babies. For more information on the free medical services at Intervisions or to support the expansion efforts, visit ivhcare.org.
Is it time for a new roof? Then it could be time for you to get to know Bell Construction. Bell Construction is a roofing company entering its 30th year of business. They specialize in residential re-roofs, like commercial jobs, and have the experience to meet all of your roofing needs with personal service. With Bell Construction, the owner will come to your home or place of business in person to inspect and ensure the quality of work that you deserve. They pride themselves in working with you on a personal basis and making sure you are satisfied. Bell Construction, 515-963-4494.
Support for The Uncommon Good is provided by Cartridge World. Cartridge World is an industry leader delivering high-performance printing products that help you save time, money, and print great.
Perfect for businesses, home offices, college students, or busy moms trying to find affordable printing supplies including ink, toner, paper, or printers. For business customers, pickup and delivery are available. Products are guaranteed or full replacement.
Cartridge World, your low-cost, environmentally friendly printing experts, 801 73rd Street in Windsor Heights, 515-564-7400, and online at cartridgeworld.com.
To be the best at something, you have to stay focused on what you do best every day. At Golden Rule Plumbing, Heating, and Cooling, we are your residential experts. Frankly, if we spent all of our time on new construction projects, we wouldn't be as skilled or available to work on your home projects. But we are ready for you, and we know residential plumbing, heating, and cooling. I'm Bobby from Golden Rule, where we deliver respect, understanding, loyalty, expertise, and service every time you call. We have a standard, and we prove it. Online at goldenrulephc.com.
Back with The Uncommon Good. This is Bo Bonner, Bud Marr as well. We hope everybody is staying inside, staying warm, and we're glad that you can be with us to talk today. But it's going to be a you and I show. I keep saying that because we might get University of Northern Iowa fans thinking we're talking about them and they send us donations. But also, the people have asked, and we listen to demands. They say that they love the interviews, but they want to make sure that we get back to something we did early on in the show, and we can do it more frequently, which is sort of dig deeper into some of the actual theories, the sort of concepts that the common good and Catholic social teaching have to offer us, and especially with the presidential elections coming up, which we can mention that more. I think people are saying, okay, let's do that. Let's take a step back and really dig deep into some of these things that we're talking about. So I thought we would talk about the concept you hear a lot that the family is the most basic unit of social consideration. Leo the 13th famously is someone who is attached to that. I just wonder, in your life, either reading Newman or in other places where you've come across that before we talk about some of its ramifications in the here and now.
Yeah, I mean, for Catholics in recent history, certainly John Paul II, and I think Pope John Paul recognized some of the currents in society that were threatening the family. And so that seemed to certainly be like a consistent concern in his magisterium.
If you look at the news, it seems that ideas of the family are coming up from all sorts of angles.
Yeah.
New York City, for better or worse, well, in this case, I'm sorry, just worse. I know that everybody should take a grain of salt when someone from Oklahoma is throwing shade at New York, but they've been in the news and not for some great stuff recently. I think all of us, probably in the Catholic sphere of things, knew about the law they've passed, probably the most permissive abortion law on any state docket that had been passed. So that has been in the news, and people fighting back and forth about what exactly that means for the future of this country, especially when you think about a place like Iowa, where we're broadcasting from, passing legislature that's almost the polar opposite. What does that mean for us? But a very particular story with a very particular person really starts rippling through the internet, especially Twitter. If it's not yesterday, it's the day before. A young mother named Malaysia Goodson, so she's 22 and had a 1-year-old daughter. She was in a subway station trying to push a stroller, I think either up or down the stairs, it doesn't matter which, but she fell trying to navigate these stairs and died from the impact of falling. They weren't able to revive her. And this, in New York alone, this became this major talking point because people say, like, yeah, people want everybody to move to New York City. They want people to be involved. There's the idea that you can, have a family and work and have it all. But then here we are in the modern world, 2019, concerned about all sorts of things, but we can't make a city safely navigable for someone who is a mother with children. And then from New York, that really spread in the nationwide, especially people following Catholics that I've been reading. And they really press the point that this is just a very obvious way that connects to so many currents where people who have families and children are not considered, and especially people with really young children like babies or children with disabilities. And the conversations that sort of lit off with that spark have gone all sorts of directions. But it made me rethink what we want to say when we say that the family is the most basic building block of society. Because too many times, I think, in our own world, in our own neck of the woods, in the Catholic world, that can sound like the nuclear family versus the world, right? If I have my family, I don't have to care about anyone else. And maybe even if you live in a particularly Catholic place, I think of some of the places in Kansas where I lived where nearly everyone in town was Catholic. Fair or not, the idea starts to be that people, it's hard to enter in those social networks, or maybe even church in a spiritual life is replaced by the fact like, well, we're Catholic because we're all family. Certainly there's a lot of pushing that we need to say that what we don't mean is a sort of modern picket fence 1.5 children nuclear family versus the world, but this much deeper sense of family. And the question starts to be something like this, not, in an ideal way, is there the family and then everybody else who hates it, but do we even make our cities in ways where where the first assumption is a family could get around it?
Well, this whole discussion, Bo, goes back to the New Testament. And at the time of Christ, there were strands in the Jewish tradition. I'm not talking about Judaism as a whole, but there were strands in the tradition that said, like, the commandments regarding love were primarily directed towards your family. Now, the Jews at that time probably had a more expansive understanding of family than we do, but you saw in the teachings of our Lord that he challenged this idea in various ways. And so Christ, on the one hand, could be really, really strict with, of course, like regarding divorce. So once you make the vows of marriage, they're indissoluble. On the other hand, he did have some very strong words about, I guess, what would you say, like compromising the kingdom for the sake of just your family. And so as Catholics today, we have to wrestle with, Christ saying, if you don't hate your mother and brother, your sister, your father, you cannot follow me. Or, like even when Our Lady comes to him, he says, my mother is the one who obeys my commands. Now, that's not a slight to the Blessed Virgin Mary, of course, but it's a reminder that what takes primacy in Christianity is following and obeying the words of Christ.
Yeah, to me, this goes back to a proper understanding of what virtue is. So virtue is a mean between two extremes. And in this case, in the political world and then the common life that we live, to talk about the common good, is the extremes are either to deal with any principle that comes up political-wise as an ideal and in sort of an abstraction. And then the other way to go too far is to think of it not concretely, but sort of, individualistically and atomistically, right? So we can either act like we're going to create the world and make it what it is with these big abstractions that we care about. And we can make, like you said, family an abstraction if it just becomes sort of a policy marker for one of the parties. But it can become atomized if it's like, oh, I only care about my family literally, and I'll do anything. I'll even smash other families to make sure my family has primacy and is good to go. All you have to do is read Dante and him talking about Italian politics at the time and realize that things have not changed substantially. So the virtue is a median between these two. And the questions that we have to ask ourselves when we say, what is a Catholic approach to politics, is something akin to, how is it that any family could flourish, or at least go along the line to flourishing better, if we instituted some policy? So it's not a matter of, will my family be okay on those subway steps? Because I hear people sometimes say that. They're like, well, my family does, X whatever policy. Why? What's wrong with yours? Yeah. But the answer is not, will your family above all others, but what sort of society do we set up where any family is more likely to flourish? So not the family as an abstraction or an atomized individual, but this robust, concrete way to say, how is it that we organize societies where families really are the primary unit, whoever families and whomever family that might be?
Yeah, Bo, and I know on the show in the past we've talked about how Catholic social teaching, properly understood, can kind of transcend the conservative-liberal divide that we set up in America. And with this issue, I want to come back to that and say, like, we don't say that just to sound cool or contrarian or whatever, but this whole discussion is cropping up in interesting places. So, like yesterday on Twitter, Jeremy McClellan, a funny guy who both of us like or whatever.
We need to get him on the show.
Yeah, he'd be great. But he got into an argument with Matt Walsh, who is, perceived by others as a conservative Catholic commentator. He's been very outspoken, for instance, against like abortion laws in the U.S. But they were talking about like what would it take for families to thrive in the U.S. And Walsh's basic position is like, if you're struggling, you should basically pick up your tent stakes and go find like a place where you can thrive. And Jeremy was kind of pointing out the sort of dangers inherent to this sort of like, just like the answer to every economic issue is more mobility, right? And these are the kind of questions like, how do we create towns and places where people can be connected to a home and not feel like they have to be on the move to make it in America?
Right, and I think about you and I, who have both ended up at different places at the same time that we probably have really, tried to really bring up these issues about home. feeling like, you bring Nebraska with you wherever you go. I bring Oklahoma wherever I go, whether people like it or not. Too bad, folks. But I'll say this, right? I think we've all said this is when we find new communities, especially, like Des Moines, where we're at, Pittsburgh, and people have lovingly accepted us, there's still the idea of, man, I really hope I can stay wherever I end up, versus the sort of idea that, no, at a moment's notice, if it gets better somewhere else, or if where you're at is worse and you need to go, that it's perfectly fine to say, I'm going to take my family, uproot them, and move them somewhere else. I mean, you and I have, in many ways, have been lucky that we've stayed mostly in the middle of the country. I know people who've moved back and forth between coasts, and we're not trying to cast aspersions. This is another way in which this whole either abstracting it or making it atomized, people will miss the point. It will sound like they're saying, oh, Bo and Bud are casting aspersions on my particular choice to move my family. And you go, no, the idea is not that you're like some sort of horrid sinner if you've moved. I've done that. The question starts to be that Jeremy brought up is that the baseline that we want to say, sure, that's normal, there's nothing to that. We know people have moved in the past. Humans have always moved. The question is there something to saying we would hope to make communities, cities, where people could have deep roots and begin to love the places that they are? And I think that if you view family as the most basic social unit in the terms that Catholic social teaching means, you can start to say that there is a preferential option to try to keep people around as much as possible. It's not always going to be the case, but in a broad way, we want to see people thrive where they're at. And it's like you said, there starts to be, I don't know, a whole other level of this where we get into left, right, Democrat, Republican, whatever, and people will argue on those terms, but there's a question to ask before we even get to the policies, which is, all things being equal, what would we hope a society made for families to thrive would look like?
Well, and with you bringing that up, I mean, as I talk about these issues on the show, it might seem like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth, but really it's like shining a light sort of on my own journey. And what I want to say is that you've already brought up the point that family has to be expanded just beyond this idea of mom, dad, 1.5 kids or whatever. And part of, I think, what many of us need to thrive is to have a connection across generations, or at the very least, regardless of your family situation, to be in a place where people know who you are, right?
Right. And go ahead.
I think jump on in.
Well, I think that's what this will go into. We're creeping towards the break here, and I think the next bag of worms that we'll open up and tackle, that's a horrible metaphor, but it's freezing outside, so leave me alone, people. When we get back from the break, will be this idea of you get a lot of chicken and egg sort of arguments. Because on one hand, what you want to say is, man, if people had the option, maybe we need to start counseling them to stay around extended family, right? So if you had the choice, wouldn't it be great to be around grandparents, aunts and uncles, longtime friends, right? You start to say, when we want people to have it all, right? This it comes up with talking about women in the workforce a lot, but it's both, it seems to me. If we want to say, you can have your career and a family, or something like Jen Fulweiler saying you can have your blue flame, right? The thing that really, you feel like you're giving to the world, but you want to have a family too. Well, that's all possible if you have an extended network. And so there's a way in which we can stop there, and it just sounds like, yeah, dummies, just choose an extended network. But then there's another question that comes up. How many people have the actual opportunity if they've wanted to? How many people have had the actual opportunity if they wanted to stick around where they could be around all of their family and have this thick sense of community? A lot of what we've run into when we've talked on the show is people who kind of have to make it happen on their own, and it's good, but it's not the same as it being natural. I don't, like you said, you don't want to spill endless personal beans because it can just sound like we're having a show talking about our own lives. But I know that somewhat comes up to play in my life, right? There's a way in which my family, if there is one, we would all live together as close as possible and get on each other's nerves until we died, right? That's like a Bonner goal. But economics sure hasn't worked that way for us. And that, to me, starts to get this next big piece that I think we can talk about when we get on the other side of the break, which is economics might not be what many people say it is on either side of the rope. It might not be. It's definitely not the be-all, end-all. in Catholic social teaching and the understanding of the common good. But certainly, if we are an incarnated creature, as humanity is, and we have to attend to the goods of the body and then the body of the politic, right? So like infrastructure, bridges, houses, and things like this. If we don't tend to the idea about what is economics for, then a lot of these questions start to become moot points. In a perfect world, you would love to have everybody around their family and deep roots and friends, and everybody designed their own flag, and they all hold hands, and they came up with their own anthems, bud, and we fed each other across the table, and lovey, love, love, love. But the problem is all of us get done with school, training, we turn 18, whatever it is, and we have to get a job. And it starts to be interesting where all of these questions start to come up. Just so you don't think it's like you have to go look at the left to find this out, Tucker Carlson, famous commentator on Fox News, is making quite a bit of noise, not only among conservatives but even liberals, because he keeps bringing this up. And the big point he keeps bringing up is, if we want to make a place where people can have families, we're going to have to ask deep questions about the economy. But before we even ask those deep questions about the economy, we all have to admit that the economy serves families and not the other way around. And boy, howdy, is this causing a lot of buzz in that neck of the woods for which he works for.
Well, I mean, so to kind of go out of my way to maybe bash a group, but they deserve a little pushback. And I'm not pulling this out of a hat. Like, I actually read an article by a Duke professor recently where he was saying that elite universities in the U.S. have gotten to a point where, like, they're very proud of what they supposedly provide for the world, but they become, he said, an engine for inequality. And what he meant by that is, as you know, Bo, like, there's parts of the country that are struggling a great deal economically, and where it's difficult for people to find work. And one of the clearest, like, the golden ticket into sort of a comfortable life is to get into one of these elite schools. Well, this professor started to trace out, like, how many students at Ivy League schools now are legacy students where their parents or grandparents went there.
Right.
And then, you know, like, even looking at the demographics of who's admitted. And what he said is, like, look, we really are sort of, like, perpetuating a certain class. And we like to think we're open doors, but that's not necessarily the case if you look at the concrete reality on the ground. So even someone, like, teaching there at a place like Duke, he was saying, like, we should maybe start thinking about university taxes where you, like, even redistribute the kind of resources that colleges have. Now, we could get into an argument about, like, the nuts and bolts of that proposal, but these kind of conversations are cropping up, and I think as Catholics we have to begin to address these things, you know, and to speak to where the world is asking these questions.
Yeah, when you think that Harvard and Yale, not only, like, everybody who sits on the Supreme Court went to one of those two places, or is Columbia included too? But it's either those two or those three. And then you think about how many people in the professional world that have a lot of sway went to those places. You and I know in the sort of university world how many people will get a job because they went there. And then you add on top of that those two colleges alone, Yale and Harvard, have endowments that put hedge funds to shame. That starts to color when people go like, well, hey, if there's not a job, move. Because what they mean is, hey, if you're in rural Iowa or rural Nebraska or rural Oklahoma and you don't have a job, why don't you just move? And I hear that and go, well, that means you think Medford, Oklahoma doesn't have any worth, or like Winterset, or, you know, anywhere you can name. And you start to go, it's not just a matter of saying, hey, dummy, if there's not a job, move. It starts to be a real question of, do these communities and places have a worth of their own by themselves as they are? And, you know, I'm not saying that things have to always be the same forever, but certainly it seems there's questions to be asked that go unasked. And, you know, we're heading up here on the break, so when we get back, I think, well, first of all, we have a great moments in church history. Hopefully it will get people in the mood to talk about some of this stuff a little more as well. But then we'll finish this out talking about the family as the most basic unit of society and how it helps us navigate the political future people are asking of us. So this is The Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner, Dr. Bud Marr, stick around. We will be back after these messages. The eagle was cold. He had to warm up. So, if you are, what I'm guessing, indoors right now, you have plenty of time to go do this right now. You can go over to ye old Facebook, type up Iowa Catholic Radio, and then go and hit the follow button. And when you do that on Facebook, magically, as if some algorithmic robot from the sky will show you what all you need to know, keeping you up to date about Iowa Catholic Radio and all that it has in store. You can do the same with Twitter, at IA Catholic Radio. Or if you're old school, you can go sign up for an email that will go to your email box twice a month. All sorts of good ways to stay connected, sticking around with Iowa Catholic Radio, both on the old internet cloud and through the diocese, and knowing our show schedule, prayer schedule, and event schedule. This is The Uncommon Good. We will be back after these messages.
Thank you to Confluence Brewing Company for your support of Iowa Catholic Radio. Confluence Brewing Company, brewed locally and featuring regular, seasonal, and limited release beers available in their tap room and at local stores, bars, and restaurants. Confluence has a beer garden for you, your family, and friends to enjoy. Confluence Brewing Company is located at 1235 Thomas Beck Road off the bike trail south of Grays Lake and online at confluencebrewing.com. Confluence Brewing Company, where good things come together, ingredients, ideas, and friends.
Is it time for a new roof? Then it could be time for you to get to know Bell Construction. Bell Construction is a roofing company entering its 30th year of business. They specialize in residential re-roofs, like commercial jobs, and have the experience to meet all of your roofing needs with personal service. With Bell Construction, the owner will come to your home or place of business in person to inspect and ensure the quality of work that you deserve. They pride themselves in working with you on a personal basis and making sure you are satisfied. Bell Construction, 515-963-4494.
Support for The Uncommon Good is provided by Cartridge World. Cartridge World is an industry leader delivering high-performance printing products that help you save time, money, and print great.
Perfect for businesses, home offices, college students, or busy moms trying to find affordable printing supplies including ink, toner, paper, or printers. For business customers, pickup and delivery are available. Products are guaranteed or full replacement.
Cartridge World, your low-cost, environmentally friendly printing experts, 801 73rd Street in Windsor Heights, 515-564-7400, and online at cartridgeworld.com.
Hi, this is Marty McDonald with McDonald Imaging Solutions. It has been my joy to support Iowa Catholic Radio's new event tents and the Pope on a Stick fan used at the Iowa State Fair. McDonald Imaging Solutions is a family-owned business with thousands of promotional items to choose from. We do custom labels, printing, branded apparel, and we provide all kinds of promotional products. I personally help any business, big or small, to build their brand with corporate apparel and promo items. McDonald Imaging Solutions, building brands, attracting new customers. Online, mcdonaldimigingsolutions.com.
Back to The Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr. We got another Great Moments in Church History lineup for you, Bud. You ready?
Yeah.
All right. Hit it.
And now, Great Moments in Church History.
The year, now, today even. The place, Iowa, just representing basically wherever you are. It's cold, really super cold, but certain creatures are beginning to stir from their ancient slumbers.
Well, Jim, everyone is hunkering down with their gallons of milk, bread, and Casey's breakfast pizza, just trying to stay warm enough to cheer for whoever against the Patriots in the Super Bowl. But what's this moving in the snow? It's presidential candidates!
It's the January before a presidential election year, people. And in Iowa, every third person you run into is likely a presidential candidate. You can see them announcing at Baradas, Tomeas, Latin Kings, all the other Italian restaurants that serve Cavatelli and Graziano grinders.
Announcing at Bebop's, Zombie Burger, Chitro, with the cha sound not an S.
Basically any library, most malls except the ones on the south side, and every Smoky Row coffee shop, even the secret ones that only the city council knows about.
They're everywhere, Jim! You can try spin moves, stiff arms, you can even try to look like a tourist going to the bridges of Madison County. But they'll tackle you!
It may seem like this is where politics starts, but always remember, folks, politics first and foremost is life in the city.
Polis is the Greek word for city. That's where we get politics, and the family is the most elemental basic unit of society.
Before campaigns or votes or policies, How we live with our closest families and friends and our love for our citizens is where we show our greatest contribution to the common good. And that doesn't start with election season, folks. It starts today. This has been another Great Moments in Church History.
I feel like that episode is like our ultimate flea flicker great moment.
Well,
it was like there were a couple laterals that I didn't see coming. I was reading the text fresh.
Sorry, I was choking on. You're pretty bad when you're laughing at your own jokes and you start coughing. But the point being is, I just was like, it's already happening, and I think there literally would have been people here this week, but except that it's so cold. And then, you know, when I first moved up here, it was 2016 in Des Moines, and so that was all going on, but I was so new to everywhere that I didn't even notice it. But, like, now it's very clear what's about to happen. So I just like the idea of, like, every restaurant you get into, there's, like, cameras and someone else is announcing, and I'm like, that's a guy who just works at Quick Trip. Why is he running for president? So
I did notice the line in there, though, about how they presidential candidates don't give as much attention to the South Side. So, yeah.
To be fair, the South Side Mall in Des Moines, I'm not sure where you would announce your presidential candidate. You probably don't want to do it in, like, the old building where Toys R Us was, so I don't know where you do that at.
No, but like you're saying, the great moments really leads into the second half of the discussion, and lest anyone think, okay, so sometimes, Bo, when I hear these kind of nuanced takes on the topics we're tackling, I get a little nervous because, so for instance, in life issues, you'll hear some Catholics talk about a seamless garment, and to me, sometimes it seems like a release valve for saying, like, well, let's not be quite as outspoken about abortion. Like, I'll just say that out loud. With this one, when we talk about economics, like, again, in some ways, I think someone could interpret this as like, oh, these guys are moving to a safe point away from the controversial matters. But I'll say foundationally, like, we brought up John Paul II. He was absolutely right about the family being the basic unit of society. And if we get that wrong, it's like kind of pulling out the foundation from the entire Jenga tower.
Yeah.
Like you and I have discussed, like, in the past, there were communities that faced really harsh circumstances. So I think of the black community in America before the civil rights movement. And the black Christians were, like, really dedicated to, I guess you could say, having strong families. You just saw, like, a high rate of successful marriages. And, like, the poorer communities in America now, like, whether that's in Appalachia, inner cities, or wherever, like, as you have marriages falling apart, like, that creates absolutely, like, almost impossible conditions for children, where across, like, the socioeconomic spectrum, like, one of the clear signs that someone's going to thrive is whether or not they live with their biological parents. So as Catholics, like, that's non-negotiable, and that's a torch that we proudly bear.
Yeah, and I think that the nice way to put that is, if we're really doing this right, not like we won't offend anyone, it's that we'll offend everyone. Or, I mean, if you're going to put it nicer, we're going to make everybody think. Certainly, it seems that sometimes what happens in the political life is, to be a board game nerd, at the beginning of Risk, everybody gets to choose which country they place their armies in, and then those are your countries. And it seems like someone imagines we've done this in political life. You're like, well, you care about that, people in that party. You care about that, right? And then nothing shall ever, go around it, and we'll go into mental gymnastics acting like only one party cares about this, that, or the other. I hope that the Catholic social teaching hurts everyone's feelings a bit, because it's demanding, right? Christ said that his yoke is easy, for us to obey him, but when it comes to realizing that the city of God and city of man, it's going to press all of our buttons to make us ask deep questions. And so I'm thinking about that, for instance, when you talk about minority communities and, for instance, African Americans, in the article on Vox.com, which is usually seen as sort of like part of the left, and they're interviewing Tucker Carlson about, like, this brouhaha he's creating by asking these questions about economics and family on Fox News, where most people, quote unquote, won't expect that. One of the questions that they point out is, well, why did you in the past? And they had a quote, right, where, these sort of questions that you're asking about, Caucasian Americans, you didn't ask about other communities. In fact, you blamed the other communities for being this way. And to his credit, he goes, well, I was wrong. And part of what I didn't realize, because I didn't live in those communities, is I didn't realize that if you're going to have strong families, that's really hard to do if you don't have things like economic stability. And he goes, I don't want to be, a Marxist about this. I don't want to say the chicken or the egg. What I want to say is these are mutually connected. If you stop having strong families, you won't have a strong economy. But if you don't have places for families to work, you're going to be seeing, like you said, this delirious effects on families. And I'll be honest, I can throw out bragging about myself. One of the things I like working at Mercy College of Health Sciences is I feel like we're trying to get people to get into a field that not only has a prospect in the future, but is a career that people can, have strong families. And to me, that's a Catholic reason to do one of the things we're doing. And that's what we have to start asking ourselves is when we start being abstract, to go back to that point I made at the first part of the show, we can fail talking about the family being the most basic social unit either as an ideal or as an atomized individual. We do this all the time with other things as well. Like we make abstractions by which we'll try to sound like we are, we care, but we don't get into the nuts and bolts of it. So an issue that mostly a lot of people see as falling on the left is something like environmentalism. It can be easy to talk about that in the ideal, I care about the planet. But Roger Scruton has this great book where he points out no one can care about the planet in the abstract. They care about places, right? I grow up, I care about this river, right? I always give my story. The Salt Fork River in Grant County, that's where I learned to fish. If that thing got polluted, I would be very mad because it is, in the sense, I'm a part of that story. If I care about a river, I can understand other people caring about their rivers. But if I don't have any river to care about, I can't care about it in the abstract. And so he calls this oikophilia, love of place, that we have to have a sense of home if we're going to care about other people's homes. But if you abstract that principle, no one can care. The right sort of, in our 2019, how this is characterized, does this with economics, right? So like the economy as an ideal that we have everything else is subservient to. But again, this sort of messes up the actual concrete way of what an economy is. So again, going back to the Greek, oikonomos, the economy is oikonomia, oikos nomos, the law of a household. The economy is about not only what do households contribute to financial wealth, but what does wealth contribute to the stability of households. If we don't have this sort of concrete way in which those things mutually interact, and so we have to ask those questions in that regard, we will serve families up to the altars of abstractions and ideals. And Tucker Carlson is getting a lot of people mad on Fox News just saying that. He says basically, I thought the idea is we had economics for the sake of families and not the other way around. And I think about Christ saying the Sabbath is made for humans, not humans for the sake of Sabbath. And how many times do we make the family subservient to ideals instead of asking the harder question about how do we make families flourish as the most basic social unit in society?
Bo, you've already warned about the dangers of abstraction, and I guess, if I could punt the ball back to you rather quickly here.
Okay.
Say someone's listening to the show right now, and they're like, yeah, these concerns seem rife to me, and they're, urgent. How do we begin to think about a way of life where we can, I guess, work against the forces the economic forces that maybe, harm the family or that make this kind of oikophilia difficult? You see what I'm saying? Does it mean just shopping at your local bookstore and not purchasing things from Amazon, or does it mean floating certain kinds of legislation, or what?
And that's why I'm running for president in No, I'm kidding.
This is what it's all been moving towards.
This was setting up, Bo's announcement. No, I would not run for president. Okay, well, first of all, the hard thing to say is to admit how insanely hard it is to imagine what we can do as individuals against everything working against that. So the first step, it seems to me, is to talk about being aware and recognizing how these things set up. So the first practical thing that always we need to do concretely as Christians is be moments of charity from the city of God in the city of man. So, I keep repeating this, but I'm stealing this from, of course, St. Augustine, who says the city of heaven is the city of God, and the city of man is that which on earth and is ruled by, inferior desires. And as, Jesus sort of says in the Bible, the wheat and the tares come up together. We are living in this time of overlap between the city of God and the city of man. And the sort of political marching orders of all Christians is to be instances of the charity which rules the city of God in the midst of the desires that rule the city of man. So the first thing that we have to do every day is to say, how will I be a moment of charity of the city of God in the city of man? And we can do that in small ways before we can obviously do those in large ways. So a small way is to start asking ourselves these deep questions about how it is that the world is marshaled against the family thriving as the basic social unit of society, and then act accordingly, right? So one way, for instance, is to interpret the person I see that's struggling. So, going back to the beginning of the show in this very practical matter, when we hear people complaining like, I would stay my communities but for student debt, but for the difficulties of the economy, if you start judging people on these abstractions, you will lose the ability to judge and relate to those people in charity, acting as moments of charity in the city of God. So that's going to govern things like, what are you going to do when you come across a beggar? What are you going to do when you work with people at your job or at your school that have hardship, and even hardship that they may have somewhat brought on themselves? How are you going to change how you relate to those people? But the bigger sort of social forces we have to marshal, I think we're so clearly at the beginning of talking about these things that I'm not dead sure what I would say the next thing to do. There's all sorts of political questions we can ask about what we do. I would say the next step for us is to stop allowing ourselves to be tied intimately to the way politics has been practiced for like the last 50 years. That would be my first practical step, is to say whatever decisions you're going to make in the political life coming up, especially in 2020, we think of presidential elections, is you don't have to abide by the narrative of the city of man. You can abide by the narrative of the city of God. And even if it's no grand sweeping change, that will change even those measures. And even in that way, right, that like if you only act like politics happens at the national level, I'm hoping that in hearing this you begin to say, well, how do we do these things at the local level, and how can I get involved?
Yeah, and Bo, that first point you were making, like, that's convicting for me, because the way that I think about it is like we should always be really careful about punching down.
Right.
And that doesn't mean, now the inverse of that is like we don't have to be paternalistic in how we think about these concerns. So there's a certain sense where like you could bracket like any sort of personal responsibility, and like obviously if someone's in a really difficult situation, there's probably all sorts of circumstances that brought them to this point. But I mean, one of the conversations that I think about, Bo, is like the ones we'd have with our students in servant leadership. Mm. And I love those kids, and the students, like, honestly, a lot of them probably had more encounters with the poor than I do, and they were genuinely concerned. But it was fascinating to me when we started talking about almsgiving, that a lot of times as humans we come up with really like acrobatic, like, well, what if he's an alcoholic, or what if he spends it on this, that, or the other, And it's just fascinating to me that like our mind sort of goes there,
right?
Where each one of us, like, we're dependent on so many different networks. Now, I think that can be the spark for all sorts of creative conversations, but I guess what I'm saying fundamentally is our first impulse has to be, this is a potential encounter with Christ. Like if I meet someone who's hungry, naked, or in prison, Jesus said, like, this is where you'll encounter my presence. So I think that's kind of, like, I know that's speaking pretty broadly, but that's where we have to begin.
Well, and there's all sorts of things, like you say, we could bring up, but the first impulse to like point out someone's sin and then say that absolves my responsibility towards them is the most profoundly non-Christian thing you can do, right? I mean, like that, if you want to talk about the most blunt thing I will say is it's perfectly legit to say this sin causes this, and we have to try to be able to evangelize and tell people why this sin, whatever it is, if they can get over it, if they can get it out of their lives, if we can eradicate it as a fallback, if we can make it less likely that people will do that, we should do all of that. Marshal everything we can to make it where the slavery of sin doesn't have as much sway in a society. But when it comes to the sinner, to notice their sin and then make that the reason that I'm absolved from responsibility for them, I'm sorry, there is nothing more alien to the New Testament than that. And that's the problem, right? Again, we talk about the virtue. On one hand, where there's the Pelagian way where we view like everybody's responsible for everything that they do because everything is their power, is wrong. Because we know, for instance, like in the spiritual life, it takes grace. And in the communal life, it really matters. Like if you have, this is just Aristotle, if you have bad friends, it's hard for you to become a good person. And sometimes you have no choice who your friends are. But on the other hand, it's, like you said, sadistically paternalistic to act like people have no free will, because then you're saying they can't change, and literally the only way that they'll have a better life in any way is if you sort of impute it to them. And then, of course, you have to listen to that language. Who do you become? Well, God, right? Showering gifts on people that you think are lower than you. This is the great liberty of realizing that people are sinners, because they can be sinners, but sinners can be redeemed, and that they're not completely responsible for all what they do, but they still have the freedom to choose otherwise. And if we can be the conduit of the charity of the city of God in the midst of the inferior desires of the city of man, we don't have to be stuck thinking, what can this person do for me? Or how dare they do that? I can disregard them. It allows us the freedom to say, I know this person is wrong, and I, of all people, because I follow the Lord, will be there in the midst of their wrongness. And I think that sometimes is what's missing in all of our talk here is, okay, we all admit that blank is wrong. Now, what can we do to be there, like, in the midst of that wound and try to be a healing presence for it?
Well, and honestly, Bo, I don't know if I could add to that. We're getting close to the end of the show, right?
Yes.
Root against the Patriots too.
Right.
That's one small.
Right, like if you want to talk about a small thing, rear up your children to the good faith and make sure that they realize that there's something that the Patriots are doing. I was trying to tell this to my kids. I'm like, I'm not sure what they're doing, but there's something.
No, I guess on a more serious note, like whenever we have these conversations, it can be kind of a discouraging thing, at least for me. Like I'm sort of prone to that temptation, but it also can be very exciting. Like we have the opportunity to do something great, and what I mean by great is not like change the world or accomplish great things, but like we can be creative in witnessing to the coming reign of God, and that looks like almsgiving, but it also looks like supporting a family who just had a child and maybe it was a difficult birth. And, like being as close as possible to your neighbors and providing that concrete support there as well.
Yep. Every soul is an entire universe. So to save one soul is to save a universe. I'd forget who I'm ripping off. I think it might be Boober, but I'm not sure. But completely plagiarizing that. But I think it's good to go. Yeah, Bud, we've hit the end of this show. So for Bud Marr, I'm Bo Bonner. May Jesus Christ, the Prince of Peace, reign in our hearts, in our families, in our city, our state, our nation, hemisphere, globe, solar system, galaxies of galaxies, whatever's above that. May Jesus Christ reign over all of it. This is The Uncommon Good. We'll be back next week. But there's all sorts of things that people can do, can stay connected with Iowa Catholic Radio. If you don't mind, how about you let us know what they can do just by listening every day?
Well, I would reiterate what you said earlier about liking us on Facebook and Twitter, but also listeners can pray the Rosary daily at 5:30 a.m., 9:30 a.m., and then in the evening at 9:30. We also pray the Angelus on air at 6 a.m.
In the flesh, if you want to run around and meet the Iowa Catholic Radio people as we walk around doing things in the diocese. Here's a few events coming up. On February 8th, Man Up West Power Lunch at St. Francis of Assisi, Friday, February 8th at noon. Free lunch provided by Chick-fil-A, but then you can hear me and Dr. Cheryl Overmeyer talk about virtue, masculinity, and narrative. It's going to be great. Register at iowacatholicradio.com. The Spring Carathon is coming up February 18th through 22nd. Please join us in our mission to save souls. A $30 monthly gift can do more good than you could ever imagine. Your financial support keeps Iowa Catholic Radio on the air with local programming to share Christ. You can give securely already, iowacatholicradio.com. The Catholic Radio, Iowa Catholic Radio app, 515-223-1150 if you want to call in. And then, of course, during Carathon specifically, we'll be running the phones to get your donations. The Ladies' Mosaic Lunch, Thursday, February 21st at St. Augustine at 11:30. We have John Pridmore giving a talk. Again, you can find us at iowacatholicradio.com. And then down the road a bit, March 30th, again at St. Francis of Assisi, Iowa Catholic Radio's Men Conference. The speakers, Deacon Harold Burke Sivers, excuse me. And then Deacon Randy Keel. I was corrected all at once. iowacatholicradio.com. And then, so looking forward to all of that. And again, glad that all of our crew that was in South Africa are back. So, yes. Well, Bud, for you, for everybody, stay warm, folks. This is The Uncommon Good. We'll see you next week.
The Uncommon Good with Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr is heard every week on wonderful Catholic stations like this one, and anytime on podcast. Just search for The Uncommon Good.